Hi, I'm Georgie Dickins, host of Stratospheric Leaders, the podcast where I get to have inspired conversations with extraordinary leaders from across capital markets. Join me to hear their game-changing strategies, the personal stories and powerful sound bites behind their stratospheric success. Every episode packed with wisdom, insight and real-world lessons, the stuff they simply don't teach you in business school. If you want to elevate your game and most importantly, those around you, this podcast is for you. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Stratospheric Leaders. Today, I'm your host, Caroline Vasquez, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at DRW. And I have the thrill of being joined by author, executive advisor, and the usual host of this podcast, Georgie Dickins. She's the financial industry's go-to voice for insights and strategies that unlock performance. So, Georgie, welcome to your show. How are you?
I'm really good. I am very excited to be on the other side. So thank you, because I already know this is going to be a very engaging and enjoyable conversation.
So you said you're on the other side today. How does that feel? Do you have more empathy for your guests now who are put in the, we'll call it a warm seat, not a hot seat?
Yeah. And normally, I know the questions I'm going to ask. I have a sense of the direction of the conversation. And today I'm like, it could go many different ways. But you know what? It's good to be in our discomfort zone. So yeah, excited.
Good. Well, I'm excited for the conversation. And as we start, I think it'd be fun to go back. A lot of people know you as sort of this executive advisor to, lots of big names in the financial industry. But before you were doing that, what were you doing? And how did those experiences shape kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah, I had 20 years in financial services, ICAP, Reuters, JPMorgan, and I loved being part of that corporate space. It was dynamic, it was innovative, it was fast-paced, and it was genuinely a really enjoyable chapter in my life. I think what I realized over time is that my motivations, my drivers changed. I think I was always an entrepreneur in residence. I like being my own boss. And I recognize the qualities that I love, which is leadership excellence, high performance, being the best of the best. Like, how do you become the best of the best? And I love working with people. Like, I really enjoy conversations, people, progression. And really, that for me is where, setting up Kajitan and Women in Leadership Global, that was really the genesis and the foundations of what I've created today.
Was there a moment in that journey where you weren't doing what you felt like you were meant to be doing that led to the creation of, hey, I'm going to stop being in the more corporate space and I am going to lean into this entrepreneurial side and calling?
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize, I love my time in the corporate world. And I think when we tune into our intuition, it is like our compass. It will give us the signs if we pay attention. And for many years, I'd wake up in the morning excited to go to work because I was learning, I was growing. And I think I just got to a space where I'm like, I can do this job really well. And when I looked ahead, I didn't see where in the organization I could step into. It didn't excite me. And I think that was the first signal which I paid attention to. I did pay attention to it, but I didn't know what to do with it. And at the time I hired a coach because I wrongly assumed if I kind of went to them and I kind of threw some money at the situation, they'd give me my blueprint to say, well, look, this is what the next step looks like. But it was much more deeper, introspective, because she said, who are you? What do you care about? What matters to you? And I think for so long, I'd really, my compensation, my bonus each year, that had been a really defining factor of self-worth and validation that I was doing a good job. And I think I got to a point probably where I was financially comfortable and we had a nice home. And I'm like, but it's not all about the money now. There are other things that I haven't yet explored about myself that they're the things that are going to bring me alive. And so really it was, I think, getting a coach that held the mirror up. And I don't think I'd really held the mirror up before. I'd kind of lost my sense of identity, but I was doing the things that I thought I loved, but I'd kind of just fallen out of love a bit with them.
Okay. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to ask a couple of follow-ups. How long between feeling like there was something there and you'd fallen out of love with what you were doing and there was this inkling of what could be, how long between that kind of moment and leaving and starting the next thing?
Oh, I'd say it was a good few years. Definitely a few years, because I convinced myself, and actually people around me kept saying, but you love your job. You love your job. Because I used to tell everyone I love my job. And so I think people like, friends and like, you're just having a little, you're having a dip. But I think when there's a recurring pattern, but I think my thing was I didn't know what to do about it. Because my world for so long had been fairly narrowly defined. It was in markets. So I didn't know what a world outside of that would look like. And I was offered a forced pause with my health. So over the years, I'd had skin cancer, I'd had a thyroid issue, I'd had miscarriages. And so I had these moments in my life where my body was giving me a whisper of like, you know what, just, slow things down, just pace things a little bit. And I didn't listen. I didn't listen to those whispers. So I think my body was giving me the signs that, you know what, that there's friction or there's a rub here, because if we love what we do, that rub it might exist a little bit, but not in the extremes that it was for me. And I ended up having a burnout, adrenal fatigue. And I went to the doctors and I'd self-diagnosed glandular fever because all the symptoms pointed to that. And but it was adrenal fatigue, and he at the time said, right, you need to take a week off work. And I said, I can't like a week, people don't take time off, people go in sick. And I might have shared this story with you before, Caroline, but he said, look, if you don't change the way you live, you are not going to see your children grow up. And that was a truth that I hadn't thought about. People who are parents, your children are some of the most, probably the most important people in your lives. And my realization at that moment was that I needed to make some better choices, ones that could give me vitality and longevity, or put me in the best position for vitality and longevity. And what was, I suppose I draw reflection on now, is that as soon as he spoke about my children, everything shifted for me. Everything shifted. It was like a night and day. And it's interesting how I couldn't have given myself that permission slip. I knew I wanted to do something different, but I couldn't give myself a permission to slow down, take a beat. And I think it was 5 or 6 weeks off work, because my body literally was just like, it's shutting down. I think it's like, if you don't take a pause, we're going to force.
We will force change.
We will force change.
Yes.
But that was a moment where I can honestly say my health was my biggest challenge, but also my savior, because that 5-6 weeks gave me space. And space and time is the ultimate luxury in today's world. For me it is. Maybe other people have mastered space and time much better. But that was the moment where I'm like, no, now is the time that I need to make that change. And it was such an awakening within me that then I was like, right, okay, so now I'm putting the kind of a flag in the sand. And I was like, right, so what am I going to do differently? Because I've been here before and I've gone straight back into old patterns. And that's where I started journaling. I started having conversations with people to be like, right, to really do that inward reflection. What did I enjoy? What brought me alive? What could I see myself doing in the future? But equally having that internal board of directors around me who could see the things within me that I couldn't see within myself. Because I think, I'd say women especially, we often diminish ourselves. We don't see all that unlocked potential. And that's where I think I had people around me to help illuminate that. So it probably took 18 months from that moment, but let's be clear, there was a couple of years before that, but 18 months from right, now it changes. But I'm not a total leap of faith. I'm more of a calculated risk in the sense of I didn't want to leave a job that had reputational capital, financial security, and just dive into some unknown territory without having explored it first. That would have felt a little bit reckless. So I started a research project, and that research project just gave me insight, gave me information, and it opened new introductions and new connections. And that exploratory journey, ultimately, 18 months of that exploratory journey, I'd created a business, I'd done my qualifications in coaching, and I look back and I think it was just a very meaningful period of my life because it was a proper chapter change.
Let's talk journaling for a little bit, because it's something you encourage us to do in your leadership groups with executive women. And I'll be honest, I actually spent some time doing one over the holiday break. And you talked about you need people who hold up the mirror and kind of, you have all the feelings of what I'm supposed to do and the shoulds and the expectations and the weight of a change. How in your journaling, if did you find space to really be honest? I read a really interesting quote about journaling that like most people still are convinced someone's going to read their journal. And so they write it almost as a performative. When you read this about me, you will think certain things. So do you have advice to share from your experience in doing it in a way that obviously did catalyze big change of how to get really authentically honest, even if it's not necessarily in the moment what you want to see reflected back at you? What is your sort of strategy been for doing it in a way that isn't just telling yourself the things you're supposed to tell yourself?
What a great question. I think probably at the start, I was like, what if my husband reads this? And I suppose sometimes now I think, because I can sometimes BMW, bitch, moan and whine about my children. I'm like, what if they see this when they're older? But it's just an honest reflection of where I'm at in that moment. And I think I was encouraged to journal maybe like 10 years ago. And at the start, I'm like, I like journal. Like, what does that even look like? I've gone with the days of having a notebook and a pen and paper and writing. But it's kind of like start where you're at. And because I sometimes think if it's quantum leaps of like, right, you have to journal for half an hour, you have to write 10 pages, then the getting started becomes really, really difficult. So I set myself mini goals to start with. It might be, right, I'm going to journal for 5 minutes. And I'm just going to not even set myself a question. I'm just going to write my pen on the paper. And I'm just going to see wherever it takes me. There's no judgment. There's no filter. There's no screening. I don't care about punctuation. And so I do 5 minutes on that. And then I go back and I'd be like, right, I'm going to now spend 5 minutes reading what I've written. And I'm going to underscore or get my highlighter pen on words that resonate. When I'm reading that journal back, there's an emotional connection with that word or statement in some way. So I do that for a few minutes or 5 minutes. And then I'd spend the next 5 minutes like, okay, so the things I've highlighted, why does that matter? Why am I even highlighting that? What's it stirred within me? And it encouraged me to go layers deeper, but very step by little step by little step. So that was a process that worked for me. Everyone will have their own way of engaging with it. And sometimes it's about giving yourself a question. Who am I is a great one. Like, who am I? Because often we'll start with labels. I'm a mum, I'm a CMO, I'm a wife, I'm a friend. But like, who am I? Like, what do I care about? And for me, I believe that, people can journal on a phone or on a computer. But actually, there's something about that pen to paper connection that I believe it's just drawing out more insights. So that's how and look, now I can journal. I can be like, right, I'm just going to see what comes up and I can write 10 pages and sometimes I never go back to it. So I never write now with the intention that I'm going to go back to it. Yet sometimes I do. So I think it's finding your own method that works for you, but start in a way that feels accessible, start in a way that feels interesting. And because I think it's one of those things, the more you engage with it, if you see there's value, it's like, okay, I'm going to do another, I'm going to do it again tomorrow. And then be consistent. I think, be consistent, because that's with all these things, that's where the marginal gains really happen, when you start to be consistent. And the most important relationship we have is with ourselves. And I think journaling is that it helps cultivate that connection.
So how did you eventually know you were on the right path?
If someone had talked to me about the word intuition 10 years ago, I'd have been like, oh, it's all woohoo, don't even know what that means. And I think there are signs all around us. And I think I've really tuned in to, I know when I feel excitement, I know when I feel scared. And scared for me, as long as it's not crazy, I'm climbing up a mountain without any safety equipment. But if something scares me, often that means I'm on the right path. When I've written books, when I started my podcast, those things really scared me because there was a fear of judgment, fear of what people may think. But actually, if it scares me, it's like, that's growth. So the right path, I started really small. I started with a few coaching clients and one of the mantras that one of my coaches shared with me is like, be open to everything and attached to nothing. Be open to everything, attached to nothing, because we can be so defined on, I have to be on this path, I have to reach this goal. But if we're so close to that goal, we're sometimes missing all the opportunities around us. So at the beginning, I kind of said yes to everything because I'm like, you know what, on this new path, I don't know yet what are the things that are going to excite me. But I know when I say yes, and I can come from a place of experience, I'll know the things I want more of. And I know the things that will have been like, you know what, that was a great experience, but that's not the type of work, or that they're not the type of clients that I want to work with. So I'd say intuitively, and I suppose on the right path, when all of my business has been based on word of mouth and referral, when you get, referrals for new clients, new opportunities, new speaking engagements, I've had to really encourage myself to take a moment to acknowledge that, because that's validation. I'm so quick onto the next thing and the doing. I don't always take that moment just to pause and be like, you know what? Yeah, let me just take that in. That's recognition of what I've done, or recognition of the value that client's had in that coaching work, which means now they're bringing me into their team, or they're connecting me to one of their, C-suite industry friends. So many, intuition and paying attention to the signals that have validated this is the right path.
I love that. And now you've been on that path for a long time, and you've certainly advised lots of companies and names of individuals that people would know. And I'm curious, one of the things that I would call your superpower is the ability to recognize and name patterns. Have you seen patterns in the work you're doing of what really makes leaders sort of effective in that next, there's leadership, there's good leadership, and then there's sort of that 1% of leadership that is truly excellent. Have you come to identify certain things that define excellence in that realm?
Yeah, it's another great question. I think I'll go with three things. I think if I look at the book Stratospheric CEOs, which is where I profile extraordinary leaders from across the industry, what are some of the defining features? One is passion. They love what they do. And that doesn't mean that every day they wake up and it's not without its obstacles, it's not without its challenges, but on balance, there is joy in what they do. And I think when we have that passion's contagious. When you walk into a room, you can tell if a leader is enthused, is excited about the vision. So, that creates, that ROI, that ripple of impact, that spreads throughout an organization. So I think passion and love for what they do is really important, because life, our careers, it is the journey. And I think sometimes we can get fixated on that destination. And when we get to the destination, I remember when I ran the New York Marathon years ago, I got to the end and I was like, okay, well, that's the marathon. And my friend, she was all very excited about the getting to the finish line. But for me, it was about the training every week, running my first 10 miles, running my first 11 miles. And I've deviated there because there's the passion and the journey for me are so critical, because none of us know what's around the corner. So loving what you do is really important. I think another defining feature is the ability to execute. There are loads of great ideas in the world, but there are very few individuals who have the risk tolerance, the ability to back themselves, that unwavering belief in their idea, and then they execute on that. And in retrospect, people can be like, oh, they made it look really easy, and people see the iceberg, the success, the accomplishments, the accolades. They don't see that submerged piece of the iceberg. So I think the ability to execute and execute well. And when we think about execution is changing paths. You just mentioned the word, like changing paths when a new path opens up is really critical. And then I think the third piece is making that sustainable productivity, making that a choice. Because in the stratosphere, in any leadership role, there are so many demands of your time. And I think often the demands of you will be outstripped by your capacity. So you have to have a clear sense of the strategies you need in place to enable you to operate at that level. Because you can love what you do. If I go back to number one, you can love what you do and have joy, and you can still burn out. So I think knowing, it goes back to that self-leadership. When you know what energizes you, what fuels you, whether it's family, whether it's exercise, whether it's reading, going on holidays, but like having whatever that is, having that in place that enables you to do your best work. And a lot of people talk, we all know we've got to take care of ourselves. Like, not telling anyone anything new, but the ability to actually do that probably goes to the second piece, like the ability to actually execute on that is quite different. So I think passion for what they do, the ability to execute and execute well, of course, correct when things are not going according to plan, and sustainable, that resilience, that sustainable productivity, I think they are critical, and not things that you probably wouldn't speak to, but when it's about it being lived and breathed, it like wholeheartedly.
I love that, because I think what I'm hearing there is most leaders have an idea of what they should be doing. They probably have 85% of those things, and the real difference is actually in the basics, right? Which is who can put it into practice, who is brave enough but also consistent enough to do the thing day after day to climb the mountain, which for most of us does not happen in a helicopter to the top. It happens sort of, step up by step up. And I think that is, what's interesting with that is that also goes to how do you also set the limits so you don't burn out? Because I would imagine that with many of the people you're working with, they have these huge ambitions and capabilities. What is your work with them in helping them sort of put that in? You use the word container a lot, which I love. Like, how do you put that in a container so that it isn't bigger than your capacity is going to be, and you're not going to hit that burnout point?
Yeah, I think several things come up. I think the first one is who you surround yourself with really matters. Like when I look at stratospheric leaders, they have the Avengers around them. They are prepared to hire people who are smarter than them. They empower, they delegate. Like the execution of the vision doesn't sit solely on their shoulders. So I think who you surround yourself with matters, and then the ability to let go. The ability to let go and let people do what you've hired them to do, because that gives you mind share, it gives you space, it gives you capacity. Too often, you see leaders who are, they talk about delegating and empowering, but they're too in the weeds. They're too close. They're too micromanaging. So I think who you surround yourself with really, really matters. I think also in that circle you surround yourself with your leadership team, but also your internal board of directors, it's having people who will tell you when you're entering that place of diminishing returns. I don't think we always recognize it in ourselves, when maybe our decision making isn't where it needs to be. We are like, we're taking on too much. Having those people who can help hold the mirror up, I think, is really important. And that's a very trusted relationship, because having those truth tellers, they are people that, you want to have people that that care about you, that you trust. So when they're telling you, they have your best interests at heart. And I think it's also acknowledging as a leader, there will be times when you operate in the energy red zone. It might be you're going through an acquisition, you're in some kind of M&A activity, just before Investor Day, or that there are going to be times where the demands are heavier than normal, but it's as long as that's not the pattern, that's not the 24/7, but that's bucketed in periods, because there's a difference between chronic stress and acute stress. So acute stress is, let's say, when my father passed away, when I lost a friend recently, that's acute stress, and it's painful and it's hard. And that stress is wrapped up in a period of time. And it doesn't mean that grief doesn't continue, or, but it's wrapped up in a period of time. Chronic stress is that low undercurrent that can be with us all the time. And that's the stress that, if that's left unattended to, we don't have strategies to mitigate it, that's the stress that can be most damaging. So I think it's helping leaders, when they are entering those places of chronic stress, what are their strategies to mitigate it, in order that they can really be as resourced as they can be, but knowing as a leader, there are certain obligations, certain asks of them that hence you've got to really love what you do and have that passion, because leadership definitely is not for the faint-hearted.
I love the sort of build your kitchen cabinet, build your set of advisors. I think that sometimes there's this assumption that those are people that just come along the whole journey with you. They were there in the beginning. They're your trusted friends. They're there with you when you reach the top. And certainly that has not necessarily been my experience or the experience of a lot of other, executives that I've talked to. And I think that finding time to build those relationships can be hard. That's an easy thing to put on the back burner of the list of must-dos and to-dos. How do you advise people to go about sort of thinking about who those people are and maybe where there's gaps in, hey, you need somebody who can help you on this, be this kind of a mirror to you. And then how do you find those? Because to your point, it also has to be this trusted relationship. So it's not necessarily always hire somebody who serves in that role. So how do you build that type of community at that level?
Yeah, so I think relationship currency is so critical because no one moves onwards in an organization, in their careers without the help and support of others. And the same way if we think of a DRW or a NASDAQ, they have that board of directors and, there'll be people who are specialized. It might be in cyber, it might be in crypto. You've got people that you can draw upon their knowledge and insight as and when you need it. And I think when people are thinking about building their internal board of directors or that kitchen cabinet you spoke to, I think it's not doing it when you need it, but it's about you're doing it all the time. When you're engaged in conversations, and these, as you said, these could be people that you've been with you since childhood, you've met in a certain chapter in your career, or equally someone you've just met who you think, wow, there's a real symbiosis here. There's a real connection. And I want to make sure I nurture that connection and stay in contact with them. So if I need advice on something, I can go to them. And I think it's also being really clear when you think about your internal board of directors, what are the hats that you need? Is it a sounding board for particular areas? Is it an accountability partner? Is it a truth teller? Is it somebody, a champion? I've got friends like you're one of them who'll be that champion when we're sometimes filled with self-doubt, who'll help you see the things in yourself that you might not be seeing. This is like an always on building relationships, and when you're connecting with people, just pay attention to where does there feel there's a connection that could be nurtured. And I think we can often find we're so busy that we try and go it alone. We don't want to ask for help. And actually, people are often really willing to give help if we ask. And I think if we're asking for help, it's being really clear on what is the help I'm seeking. Do I want you to be a sounding board? Do I want you just to listen? I hear CEOs who just sometimes want to vent because they don't have places to vent. They don't have places where they can release the pressure valve because there's always, they're expected to behave and act in a certain way. And, what they share can be sensitive. So it's what's the role you need that person to perform and being very clear with that.
What's the most common leadership blind spot that you see amongst your clients?
That they assume that if they've shared, let's say, a vision or a strategy, they've shared it in a town hall or they've shared it at a leadership team meeting, that everyone's on board. So I think they believe there's alignment. And, like I say to a lot of leaders, you have to be that chief repetition officer, that CRO, or that chief reinforcement officer. Transparency is equity. You've got to communicate and over-communicate strategies and vision, because people hear things in different ways. And just because you've said something once doesn't mean it's landed, doesn't mean someone's fully understood and taken on board like what you're sharing. So that, there's a number of blind spots, but that would be you making an assumption that people have understood what you shared.
You're speaking my language there as the chief communications officer who tells many of our executives that when you're tired of saying something, everyone is just finally starting to hear you.
It's true. It's really true. And it's I think it's also recognizing that people hear things in different ways. Some people are auditory, so they'll hear you. Other people is that they're visual, so they need to see you, and some kinesthetic, they need to feel the energy behind the words. And I think sometimes we can share, or leaders can share a message in their leadership, their preference, whether it's, how they choose to hear a message. And that might not be how everyone else really, processes the message.
Where do very successful leaders tend to overestimate themselves?
That's a really good question. I think it's, I spoke a minute ago to resilience, and I know that's a word that's bandied around a lot, so I'm very conscious in my choice of that. There are so many Arsenal leaders, more so than ever before. Their stakeholders are on 24/7. And I think people who choose to step into that role of leadership, they are resilient. They are people who can run fast. And I said, we can love what we do and still burn out. We only have one energy tank. I think it can be overestimating the energy they have at times.
What distinguishes leaders who continue to grow from those who plateau in your experience?
The way I think about plateauing, it's like, is it a forced plateau or one you've chosen? I've seen people in their careers, friends and people I've worked with before, who have reached their own defined ceiling. Because success means different things to different people. Some people want to be a CEO. They want to be the decision maker in the room. They want to be on a board. If we think of Trivial Pursuit and all those pieces in that pie, some people are like, well, look, I want to be maybe an MD, but I want to make sure I'm home every day at 6 p.m. to have dinner with my children. I don't want to be traveling. I want to make sure I can they know what success means to them. So, and they know what that next level, the expectations look like. And that's just not for them. So I think sometimes that plateau in a career is chosen. It's chosen by you. It goes to that self-leadership. People really know themselves. And so they're like, look, I'm happy and I'm happy to acclimatize at this level. I think others, that plateau is a forced plateau because they don't have a willingness to learn to be agile. The world is evolving at record pace around us and they're just not adaptable. They've been given feedback about how they can iterate their own self-leadership and leadership in the workplace. And they listen, or maybe they don't listen, but they certainly don't take action. And that adaptability piece is really key because in today's world, you have to be adaptable. You just have to look at technologies, the advancements that we're seeing. It's the great saying, I think, by Jim Collins, the what got you here won't get you there. There are many skills and defining features that kind of get us to a level of success. But that next level, it requires us to look at what does that next step up, what's needed for that. And often it's very different.
And what about for you? What is your next step look like? What does your continued evolution look like?
It's a really good question, holding the mirror up to me. One of my words for this year is consistent. I talked about, leaders having systems and strategies in place for their own well-being, their vitality. And when I'm on top of my game, I'm so consistent with my fuel sources, putting them in, and for me, getting the right amount of sleep. And I just know the things that work for me. But I kind of swing from being consistent to really inconsistent. And so this year, it's about consistency and recognizing some is better than none. So let's say, one of my goals is half an hour of exercise a day and I only manage 10 minutes. Well, look, some is better than none. But consistency is just, and I look at my son, he's got a podcast and he's consistent. And I look at him and I think that's what I want to embody, that consistency. And another thing for me next year is really that inner faith, that self-trust. I often can lean into second guessing myself, which is not always a bad thing. If it's because you don't want to sometimes go at pace that you're not thinking things through. But I think I can sometimes overthink, and it's like really owning my qualities, what I bring, and just coming from that. I want to embody that unwavering belief I see in the entrepreneurs that I work with, because it's so infectious, it's so palpable. And when I'm in the room with them, I come out feeling more radiant, more energized. They activate my thinking. And so it's just trusting that what I'm doing in the world is valued, it's creating value, and and people can leverage those insights to really influence, their own trajectory in this world.
Not everyone gets to come in and have a one-on-one conversation with you, but obviously you have a wide listener base of other senior leaders, maybe some of whom are starting to think, I wonder what is next, if there is that next level and I want to push for that. And so I'm curious, is there a question that you would invite them to maybe sit with?
The picture that comes up for me as you're saying that is the when the archers, the board where got the bow and arrow. And I think sometimes if we think about an arrow to hit the target, you've got to pull the arrow, get that tension. So it is that slowing down to go faster. It's creating space, but being really intentional about creating that space. And it will be different questions for different people. I'd first of all want to explore, what do I care about? What matters to me? As you go through your career, you're building experience, you're making new connections. Listen to that intuition. What are the things that I really enjoy? Because there's a continuum. We can love many things, but then if we had to grade things, we would start to see what are the things that I most enjoy and why? What is it about that? Is it the culture? Was it the people I work with? Was it the job itself? Start to pay attention to those things, because I think that gives you data points. And I think today's world, we've become these human doings. It's go, go, go. It's constant, that we've kind of lost connection. Well, I see this. Maybe, there's others who are more connected to themselves, but we've kind of lost that connection to ourselves. And my path might be very different to your path. No one can tell us the stuff that's in here. It's for us to kind of really, when we change the questions we ask ourselves, we start to change our experience because it's offering us insight. So I would first of all just encourage people to really pay attention to what are the things that light them up. Like listen to those body whispers, because the body can't talk, but it can give you the vital clues if you pay attention.
Okay, so we're going to end with my favorite way to close these conversations out. I do this with every executive I sit down with, whether it's in one of our town halls or when I'm moderating my husband's podcast every once in a while. A quick fire rapid round. So your job is first thing that comes to mind, you're going to say it. Are you ready?
Yes. And can I say you've not shared this with these questions before? So this is very much...
That's part of the rules of the road of this. It really has to be instinct.
Okay.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Usual order at the coffee shop?
Oh, peppermint tea.
Book, other than your amazing ones, that you always recommend someone reads?
Oh, gosh. Oh, there's so many. The 4 Agreements.
What is your hidden superpower?
See, I don't know if I have hidden superpower.
I'm going to answer this one for you. You can make anything into a memorable acronym, like instantaneously.
Let's go with that. I like that one.
Favorite family activity?
Oh, this holiday's been playing darts with my children.
Place you most want to visit?
Costa Rica.
The most unleader-like thing you enjoy? I mean, surely you watch bad TV or you listen to rap music or something.
Yeah, I listen. Yes. I used to love watching the Kardashians just because it was off-switch TV.
I love that. One thing people are surprised to learn about you once they know you well.
That I'm really highly judgmental.
And finally, one habit that makes you better at your work but isn't obviously productive.
My morning routine.
Love it. And that's a wrap. Georgie, what an honor and a treat to get to host this conversation with you. On behalf of our fellow Constellation cohorts, which is a group of executive women that you gather and advise, I want it on record here that you make us better leaders through your warmth, your curiosity, and your wisdom. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for listening.
If you want to see the full episode, please do look at Apple and Spotify under Stratospheric Leaders, or go to YouTube where it will be under Georgie Dickins. I hope you enjoyed the full episode. There are so many great sound bites shared.